Hello, Caroline. Huge welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and welcome to Dragon HQ and Dragon Studio.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for the welcome. So I am fascinated by the topic we're going to explore. I have a deep personal connection to dragons that I may well share some of as we talk, but also the wider topic we're talking about here of really embracing and working with our connection to individual spirits, whether that's the dragon or anything else, I think is going to be such a powerful topic for our listeners, whom I believe many of which are meant to have the connections of this kind themselves. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into this. And first, I'd love to hear a bit about how I think you describe yourself on YouTube, is it right? The original dragon lady. And it's not your average job description. How have you come to do this for your work?
Okay,
I actually feel like saying life and work, because I can feel that it's like a very big passion. It's certainly not just your work.
So the original Dragon Lady was given to me by the dragons, not by me. And that came via a friend who and the dragon kept coming to her and saying, she has to be called the original Dragon Lady. This was as the cards were being created.
I've got the cards, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And
they're lovely.
Oh, bless you, thank you. And I kept saying no, because I don't know if there's anybody else before me doing this. And they wouldn't leave her alone until I actually agreed to have the title, the original Dragon Lady. And it came about, I think, because I was possibly the original person to take dragons out into the wider community with the oracle cards. I think that's how it came about, really. But it wasn't a title.
The truth in that.
Yeah, I was very, very uncomfortable with that, to be quite honest. But the dragons came in through my Reiki 1, which is how a lot of people connect with dragons. They had been on my radar prior to that, which is a bit of a convoluted story. But they were actually came onto my radar fully during my Reiki 1 in 2004, 2005. And I was given 48 all at once, which is the foundation of the deck.
Wow.
That was a wow. That was like holy cow, really?
Goodness.
And
then
so
how did
it started.
I love this. So I'm curious to know more. How did it, because I'm guessing at the time you had no real context for those, all those dragons appearing.
No,
what
nothing.
did you do with that?
During that first download, they gave me my life's work, and which was to create the cards, to teach dragon, to write a book, and to do a couple of other things. So it's like, okay, well, the teaching was relatively easy because I was already teaching in the spiritual arena anyway. So all I needed was the information for the dragons to share it. So that concept was actually, for me, was relatively easy. Just give me the information and I'll tie the bits together and I'll put it out there. The cards was actually really difficult because I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. So I don't, in that creative sense, I am just not creative in any way. So that took a really long time to find the right artist. And I had no idea where to go, how to do it, didn't know anything about publishing. And that actually took about 13 to 15 years.
Wow.
And that, again, synchronicity, universe lined up, having dinner with a friend, it all went chunk, 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 chunk. I had all the artists I needed within the space of 2 or 3 weeks. And then the way we went. But the work, the universe supports what's required and what you've got the passion to do, and that's what happened.
Oh wow, I love that. So coming to, I guess, how this links back to what I was saying earlier, I feel that the vast majority of our listeners are one way or another, not meant to perhaps go create a deck of dragon cards, but are very much meant to consciously work with and be guided and helped and supported and even protected by specific spirits. And so your story is such a beautiful example of that, like probably one of the most tangible examples of something I see is happening all the time, but we don't always have such a tangible example of that. I'd love to know your thoughts in terms of, why does this happen? Why do we have these spirits who are here to work with us? What have you seen about that?
I think I'm taking this from a dragon perspective, but it applies. You can apply it to all our sort of spirit guides and ascended masters and whatever. Is that it's our work is to make us or support us to be the best version of ourselves. And for me, the biggest lesson that our earth walk teaches us is to actually learn to trust. Trust ourselves, trust our guidance, trust the universe and the synchronicities. And when you can put your doubts aside and that skepticism and the fear that comes with that, you end up following, I call it a trail of breadcrumbs, because the dragons will give you a trail of breadcrumbs to follow. And it's literally one stepping stone at a time. They never or rarely give you the entire picture. And I've not had the entire picture from any of the spiritual work I've done over the years. But it's only working with the dragons, solidly, that I've realised that there's these stepping stones that we follow, this trail of breadcrumbs that we follow. And it's all about becoming the best complete version that we can become to fulfill contracts, heal karma, and all the rest of it. Did that answer that question?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's I often use those words as well, breadcrumbs, because once we're aware that they're going to be shown to us, they just appear over and over. And it's like the moment we are like, oh, okay, that. And sometimes they come quite after a rupture, where whatever has been, I'm going through one at the moment, it's like, oh, I thought my next step in my path was going to look like this. Suddenly it's not. Okay, but I know the next breadcrumb will appear. I know I don't need to be, desperate and worried and, like, what do I do? I trust now that all of this is divinely guided. I just need to just wait, and the next breadcrumb will be shown.
Absolutely. And quite often when we're in that state of panic, we miss the messages.
Yes.
And if we can stay centered, and that is the challenge of being a human doing, which is what the dragons call us. If you take the word human being, our point is to actually be that centered, grounded, connected state of being. But as humans, we're always doing. And we miss, or we can miss, that next breadcrumb.
Absolutely.
And if we can find that point of center, that grounded quietness within, we then receive the guidance, whether that's through a direct message, spirit, dragon, or otherwise, or whether the universe lines up with synchronicities. The guidance is always there. It's just that in our humanness, if we can't trust, then we miss it.
Yes. Yeah. And this is, I think, at this point, speaking personally, but I can tell the same for you, true for you. At this point in my journey, that's actually now, it's not even easy. It's just like a choiceless choice. I've just been shown this so clearly that I can trust, and there is no point doing anything else. It's easy. I think at the early stages of the path, that isn't the case for most of us. No. We're so trained to look at life in this kind of very heady way, very logical, kind of following what we think is that path that's been laid down. It does take a kind of real conscious choosing into trusting in order to get to the place where that's just how life unfolds. So for people who are perhaps still, somewhere on that, and I think in some ways we're always still on that path, but kind of perhaps the earlier stages of that path, where they're kind of like, are there guides there for me? Are there spirits there for me? What would you say? How can they open to connect to them, hear them, trust them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's so varied because everybody works in a different way. The big one that I've learned to understand, and it is, and you alluded to it just now, is actually get out of our heads. Is if we can get into our body and connect. For me, it's always at a heart level. So it's connect to that heart. And I use a lot of mindfulness techniques, so mindful breathing, stop with the monkey mind chatter type of techniques. And when you come to that point of inner stillness, the dragons talk about it is you've actually shut up and you can hear us. And but it does take practice. There is not a quick fix for any of this work. It is a process, and some days will be better than others. It is that meditation. It is journaling. It whatever works with painting, and it's coming into that quiet space. Meditation, yoga, tai chi, all of those things aid us to come to that stillness within. And when we can find that stillness within, spirit actually gets a look in. I said, oh, hello, right, you're listening. Hallelujah. I can now tell you, or I can show you. But until we go to that quiet within, because they can't get above our cacophony of sound that's going on in our minds. That's my experience. I'm always open to other people's experiences. You know, if there's something really, really important, you will hear them over the noise, over your internal noise. And they do shout. But ultimately, it is I've got to say it, there's not a quick fix. Any spiritual work you do, it is a discipline. It is a devotion, and it's a devotion to your chosen path. Dragon, spirit, angelic, healing, or whatever it is that makes your heart sing, really. And yeah, it's not always an easy path there's not always an easy path to tread.
It really isn't, but worth everything. I love everything you've just said there. So coming to what you said at the end there, I couldn't agree more. I can't see a way that we can live really from our souls in this deep connection with spirit without it being from deep, deep devotion.
Agreed.
That it has to come from there. It has to come from there. In the early stages, that might be hard to really connect into, but over time, it's the only thing that makes sense, is what I've found. So kind of orientating ourselves towards what am I say this to our students all the time, what are you devoted to? Because even asking the question gives them the opportunity to recognize there's all this going on, but what's true that's at a deeper level? Like, why are you even here having this experience? And then what you were saying about creating those opportunities for the chatter to die down so spirit can actually get a look in. We often, the way that we work is very connected, as you probably can guess by the name of the podcast, is very connected to nature, to the outer wildness. And so a lot of the work we'll be doing is inviting people to make a special connection with a tree local to them, to go on wild wanders. And really what's so important, I was talking to, I won't out who this was, but I was talking to a family member the other day, and we were talking about walking. And she'd got into this habit of watching TV on her phone as she walked. And I was just like, oh my goodness, that seems so alien at that point, that someone, no judgment, you know, hey, people are on their own path, but there was this moment of like, because of the work we do, because of what we're inviting people into, like, seems so alien. It's like you have this golden opportunity to go on a walk, be really present. So we very clearly say to people, you know, don't listen to a podcast, don't listen to music, don't be chattering, just be present to where you are, the beings around you. And again, if you're going to connect with a tree, that your focus. And so for me, it was just like, oh, but I actually think, you know, may not be watching television, but degrees of that, even when we're in an environment that is so supportive of us growing quiet and actually being able to listen, even then we fill it with these things that are going to take our awareness away from being able to open to spirit. I think this is just, again, right now, kind of like a modern pandemic in a way.
Agreed. And well, like we've been discussing, we've both got dogs. So for me, a part of my morning my morning routine is, after I've done my own spiritual practice, is get the dogs out in the woods. And it's that nature based, and spirit is very much nature based, particularly dragon, because they're off the land. Many of them are off the land, in the land. They're the guardians of the environment that you're in many instances. When I was when the dragons had sort of nudged me to recreate the deck, to do the deck, to revisit the deck, sorry. I was out. We only had the one dog at the time, and it was about this time of year, so sort of late September, early October, actually, when we did this. And a guide joined me, along with my wolf, because I have my power animal was a wolf. No surprise there, since I've got 3 dogs. Anyway, and they were guiding me along. And then I was asked to stop at I was asked to go further than I would normally go, and I was to stop. And in this particular point, there'd be a beam of light coming through the trees. And I got to designated spot. Sure enough, there's a beam of light coming straight through the trees. I was told to stand in the center of it. And I stood there, and everything, bearing in mind I was in woodland, everything went absolutely dead silent. There was not a sound. And then a leaf came spiraling down directly in front of me, so right through central chakra level, and landed at my feet. I was like, okay. And I was given the message about seeing the unseen. And that was actually illuminating from my deck. And then on the way back, I got the message. And when it was years later, I then actually looked up, because I got the information he connected to Uriel, Archangel Uriel. And I actually looked up Uriel fairly recently, in the last year or so. And Uriel actually translates as God's light.
Oh, goodness.
And I was stood
yes.
in this beam of light. It gives me goosebumps even now. And so our guides will come to us in many different ways, but nature for me is a big one for connection. Woods, water, open space, ancient sacred sites, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so simple, it can be overlooked, almost like it should be more complicated, but absolutely, my own experience, but again, that of all of the people we work with, it is such a powerful portal back to ourselves. Ultimately, it's really what it is. So I feel this again, whilst I really think it's helpful for us to talk more generally about this kind of connection with spirits and guides, I would love to hear more about the dragons in particular. So what do you feel is their message for these times? Like, why the dragons? Why now? Why are they, you have your own personal experience and particular work that's connected to I see you almost like doing it, not really in service for them, because in some ways they are being of service to you, but there's a reason they're coming through you. And again, I have my own personal experience with dragons, but it feels like there's something showing up for many of us who are in this broader kind of work related to dragons at the moment. Why do you feel that is? Or why have you been told that is? Because I'm sure they've told you.
So when I asked dragons why dragons, I got why not. It's like, you have angels, you have spirit guides, you have everything else, so why not dragons? But what but they can be a little bit flippant and a little bit they've got very dry sense of humor. Anyway, so the reason we have dragon now, we've always had dragon, by the way, dragon's been with us forever. The reason we have dragon now is that we're actually ready, and it's the next part of our spiritual evolution. So the dragons don't like the word ascension. They think, for them, it's actually we are at a point as a collective now, we are ready to take our spiritual development up to the next level. So that's spiritual evolution. And a big chunk of that work, if you follow other dragon people, and there's one particular person, and she references the dragons doing the heavy lifting of the planet, which, and she's not wrong. but there's also much more than that with them. But my understanding and the work that I do with the dragons that they've taught me, a lot of it is about getting us to understand ourselves and actually do that shadow work. Because when we look at what limits us, because we are limitless beings with huge potential, which can carry the frequency of dragon, because we're shifting from vibration to frequency. And dragon carry a frequency, which is why a lot of people find their energy quite hard to manage, because they're not on a vibrational level, they're on a frequency level. To carry the frequency and to have the upgrades that are coming in, whether you're looking at DNA coding or anything else, to actually hold all of this energy that's coming in, we've actually got to be a really good, clear channel. And that is about doing our healing, doing that deeper healing, not the surface stuff, not the fluffy stuff. It's that stuff that makes you really look at yourself and not liking what you see, but actually being brave enough to dive in with your dragons to hear it, to heal it, clear it, and actually understand yourself on a much deeper level. And this can be any kind of a wound that we carry. Lack of confidence is probably quite a common one. And actually start to work on that with your dragons. And they will then guide you. If you need professional support, they will then guide you if you ask them to take you to the next level and to the particular professional support that you need.
I love, as we talked about before we started recording, a huge part of our work is that very healing shadow work that you're talking about. It's essential. Without that, really, any healing work we're doing is sort of based on firstly, we have very little power. Secondly, it's going to be an expression of the very wound that hasn't yet been healed. And so I couldn't agree with that more. What I really love about what you've said there is the way you said that work with your dragons, with your helpers. And I think this is a really important distinction to make. Those of us that have been in, let's say, kind of, healing, shadow work, therapy work circles for a long time, it is there's incredible work out there, but often what it's missing is this really clear, conscious understanding that we're not doing this alone, that we are so supported, so guided, so loved. And that for me is what can make the difference between someone who doesn't actually feel safe enough to go really deep into those wounds, because as you say, it can be so painful, such deep, hard, painful work. It can make the real difference between someone just not feeling safe enough to do that to someone feeling like, I'm not alone doing this. I've got a team who are here, help me. I had an experience, it was actually early this year, where without going into too much detail, I was going through a very intense shamanic initiation, and at the point where I felt that I was kind of on the edge of not being able to stay in it any longer. It was so intense, so physically intense, emotionally as well, but it was on every level, at the point where I don't know if I can keep going. And the dragon came in and instantly made that possible, instantly gave me that feeling of protection and power that allowed me to choose in to the deep healing I knew was on the other side of that. But I couldn't have done that without that, knowing the dragon literally had my back. And I say literally because that's where the dragon was. One of the most just beautiful, profound healing experiences of my life, and I couldn't have done it without the dragon.
That doesn't surprise me at all, and I will often I often say the dragons have got your back. And that is literally what they do. Because what they do is there's a weight comes in behind you,
yes,
as they wrap their wings around you.
Yes, I felt it. It was I could psychically see the dragon, but I could feel the dragon. I could feel its wings. I could feel its power here, here, just
That's it. Yeah, around the shoulders and the neck. Absolutely. That's where it really comes in. And so it doesn't surprise me at all. And when you do any healing work, the dragons will take you to where, if you invite them in with the intention that you want to do some healing work, some, you know, that's like deeper healing work, either on your own or with another, or with a guided by another professional, depending on where you are on your journey and what knowledge you have, the dragons will always guide and support you. And if you're doing it on your own with the dragons, they will only take you to as far as you can manage, because it's ever the onion skin.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So again, I love what you said before we started recording. I think it was there was someone asked you a question, kind of it was to do with, you know, like, but what if it isn't the dragons? You know, what if it's, you know, is it even really a dragon, or is it just that's the kind of representation? I can't quite remember the exact question you asked, but I love what you said in terms, you know, it could be to show up in the form of a kind of more like human spirit guide, or a wolf, or this or that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of like these different ways that we can experience ultimately a representation of spirit. What's your thoughts in terms of like, why do we have these different representations? What do they mean? How does that affect how we might work with them?
I think it really depends on what our interests are. I think there's a number of answers to that. So it depends on what our incarnations have been. Where do we herald from, you know, from different incarnations? What are our interests? What are our fears? What are our expectations? So spirit will guide us in whatever form best resonates with our energy. So this could be, you know, back in the day when I first started learning and training, the wildest wife had Native American guides. It was really, really common. You know, everybody had a Native American guide. So I think there's an element of, to use the word fashion in inverted commas. Will there be like a collective energy of who people will connect with energetically? A lot of there's a huge amount now of people connecting with the star beings, the light beings, especially through crystal skulls and that type of thing. So whatever your interest is will frequently have an impact on the spirit energy that you work with. Now, a bit like me and many people that I work with, is dragons then just suddenly make this appearance out of nowhere.
That's how it happened for me.
Yeah, and it's like, I've got 48 dragons. Why? You know, please tell me, because that's excuse me, a little bit overwhelming. And so, when it comes to dragon, there are two types of working with dragon. Dragon chooses you. Ultimately, you don't go looking for dragon. So dragons normally turn up in a healing or in meditation or something like that. And if they turn up more than once, like on a few occasions, then you can rest assured dragons have chosen you to work with. This has only come into my understanding in very recent times. If a dragon shows up once, it doesn't necessarily mean that dragon has chosen you to work with or chosen to work with you. They may have come in for that specific healing, depending on what you were doing or what that particular bit of work you were doing. Dragons may have show up, but it doesn't mean that they are going to work with you because you're working in service, because that's what working with dragon is. It's about being of service to the planet, to humanity, and to yourself. So we will have whatever guides, spirit guides we need, whether that be ascended masters, dragons, star beings, people from different cultures. It will just completely depend on what our spiritual needs are for our evolution at that time, what our understanding is at that time, and what we're ready to accept.
Yes. That last one in particular, I'm smiling as you say this, because cut a very long story short, I've been resistant to this work, this path for most of my life. One way or another, I've been kind of like doing my best not to do it, and like kept getting dragged, kicking and screaming deeper and deeper into it. And with dragons in particular, it felt so, I guess, another level of almost like unbelievable, grandiose. That's very much the word I kind of like. I tend to kind of err more on the kind of like, if it feels humble, it feels right. And dragons are kind of like, you know, one of the ones that kind of feel most sort of grandiose. I'm like, oh yes, my power animal's a dragon. It's just like all of that. I was just like, you know, I'm kind of like moving forward on everything else I've been shown, and dragons were one of the very final pieces I was ready to accept. It really had to be kind of like, you know, forced into my awareness to the point where I could no longer deny it. So I really love what you've just said there about accept, because for different people, depending on our you know, our unique design, our wounding, the kind of views we have on the world, there absolutely will be things that we just aren't able to accept, aren't ready to accept. And I think that's a really, really great point to make.
It is, and it's what we're ready for, isn't it? Because the dragons, they're not easy energies to work with. And what I find really interesting is quite often people will come to me because they want me to know what their dragons want them to do. And my heart sinks. Is like, oh no, you've got to do the work yourself. And that's the thing with dragon. It's about doing that work yourself. You know, my role, if you're ready to accept it, is to guide you to deepen that connection to self and to your dragon kin, to be a dragon rider, to fly high with your winged family, if you're ready to do the work. And if you're not, then one, I'm not the person to work with. But two, but you're also not really ready to work with dragon. And I think that's the truth of it. So it is that acceptance, because it's a responsibility to working with any kind of spirit. We have a responsibility to honor the energy that they share with us and honor their wisdom, and also knowing the difference when it's your ego and when it's actually truly spirit. And that's something that some people do struggle with. So of course, when you come back to the inner quiet heart space, you then get to know the difference of what is your ego mind to what is a direct connection with spirit, and what is being really guided, because the message will often accompany a feeling or a set of synchronicities.
Yes. Oh, this is really juicy. So that I often think of is really like learning a new language. Really, and it's a different language to, you know, when we typically think of, you know, learning a foreign language, but it is a language. It comes in all sorts of forms. You know, some of us see these things, sometimes we hear it, sometimes we just know it, sometimes it's like comes with you know, chills or goosebumps. There's just so many different ways that we learn that language of spirits. And knowing that up front, I think, is so helpful, because we're then kind of like, oh, okay, there isn't a kind of nice, neat phrase book I can use, but at least I know to start to look out for the things that let me know this is that language, and this is how this particular language is received for me uniquely. I think that's something so helpful, because I think sometimes we can think there's a cookie cutter, like, oh, it will always be like this, sound like this. And what I've understood over time, it's like, it's as unique as all of us.
Absolutely. And what I love working with dragons, probably more than any other energy, is that they will they will use whatever they need to use to get their message across. So you could be riding to work on the bus and you see a word on a billboard and the penny drops, because that fits in with what you're working on. You could pick up a book and there'll be a sentence in the book, and the universe and the dragons will use whatever means necessary to actually get across that synchronistic message to you. as well as, your own feelings and things. A song on the radio, anything can happen. And your job, again, centered awareness, is actually to recognize it when the universe is speaking to you.
So there's a couple of really interesting words that have cropped up as we've been talking. One of them is sovereignty, which, the way you may not use that particular word, but I can feel, and
yes,
this is very much like in the work that we do very consciously, sovereignty is one of the foundational elements of the work we do. And I'm realizing through what you're saying that the dragons bring a very distinctly sovereign energy. Like there has to be sovereignty in our relationship with them, and our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with the world. That feels, I don't know if you'd agree with that. That feels like distinct to dragons, as opposed to, I'm not saying it's lacking in others, but very distinct with dragons. Would you agree with that?
I would, because when you think about sovereignty, you think power, you think wealth, you think whatever you really want to think when you think of the word sovereignty. But with the dragons, it's actually accountability and personal responsibility.
Yes.
And that's the sovereignty, the energy that the dragons work with. So honesty, integrity, accountability, personal responsibility, because you are only responsible for your own life, your own feelings, your own actions. You cannot be responsible for what anybody else does around you. And as long as you take responsibility with integrity for your own actions and you follow your breadcrumb trail, a whole world of dragons or spirit opens up for you.
That really, I'm smiling as I'm now thinking like, no wonder that's something that's sovereignty is so important to me, so important in the work that we do. And I'm now like, okay, that makes sense. So coming to the other word that was really clear in what you were saying is synchronicity. And Jung coined that term, but of course the thing itself is ancient, and I think anyone on their soul path, no matter the spirits they're working with, will have synchronicity show up. What's interesting is, as you were saying it, I was like, it feels as though you're saying something is when working with dragons, synchronicity is even more present. And it made me recall something. I work with for simplicity, we'll call him a therapist. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll call him a therapist. He said to me about a month ago, he said, I noticed you seem to experience like way more synchronicity than is normal. And he's actually a kind of Jungian therapist. So he's kind of, very focused on synchronicity and its place in our kind of work of individuation. And it's like, I really noticed that quite often I'll have a session with him, and then immediately after the session I'll have a synchronicity that's directly related to like a crazy level to what we've just been speaking about. So I'll say, hey, look, this has literally just shown up straight after we've spoken. And so he's just said that to me very recently, and I'm like, is that so then? Is there a deeper level of synchronicity that shows up when we are working with dragons that you've noticed?
Yeah, do you know, I've not thought of it in that way, but I think actually you're right, because what the dragons do, and we just think about this for a minute, because that's a question I've not even considered. So give me a minute. The dragons will use the universe around you to deepen their message. So if you've got, with the situation that you talk about, you were just talking about that particular instance, for me, it's almost like the synchronicities become a confirmation that you're on the right path, you're doing the right work. But it also, if you clock it and acknowledge it fully, not just the past thing, there's a synchronicity, you actually completely acknowledge it on a physical emotional and spiritual level, it will actually take you deeper onto the path that you're currently treading. That's how it feels. It's like, yes, you're on the right path, you've noticed, and it will sort of lead you somewhere, potentially could lead you somewhere else. They will absolutely use the world around you for that. But again, it's always a journey to the self with the dragons. When you first start you start working with them for that initial healing, because this is what we're talking about. So it's about deepening that healing, deepening the understanding of self, limitations, expectations, and everything else. And then once you've experienced that, the world opens up, and I just see it like an egg that just, or an orb that just keeps getting bigger, because as you accept and heal and develop, like your world expands, and it just keeps expanding like a balloon around you, and you start to view the world. you view the world. Yeah, you view the world differently.
Yeah, what just came to me as you were saying that, it's like there is actually a sovereign relationship to synchronicity that we can develop, where it's not just a kind of, oh, that's nice that I've just had a synchronicity, but actually really being in sovereign relation, like what is this showing me? What's this inviting me even more deeply into? What choices is this illuminating?
Absolutely. It is. That's exactly it. With your completely. Yeah, I love these expanding conversations, because they take me in directions I hadn't even considered.
Yeah, this is a delight. This is a delight. The time is flying by, and I'm kind of like conscious, like we need to sort of start to gently move towards a close. For people listening, and again, I think returning to the kind of like the wider theme of, it doesn't necessarily need to be dragons. It could be for someone else a different form of spirit helper. We've talked about making that initial kind of like open, like quietening and opening, so we can start to hear. What have you seen? So we've been focusing at the moment on dragons and how they show up and work with life. More broadly, in the work that you've done with all different kinds of people, what kind of I guess sort of help, guidance, protection could people, I don't mean expect as in like where is my help and protection, but kind of what have you seen show up for people in terms of the ways their different guides and spirit helpers have shown up in their lives? And maybe particularly coming back to the beginning of the question, sorry, this is making already a difficult question even more challenging, and specifically in the way that they serve others.
I don't think it matters what energy you work with. If you're working as being a guide to others, then your team, whatever they consist of, whether you're talking animals, people, star beings, or dragons, mermaids, fairies, whatever, your team will always guide you to guide others. If you're talking from a healing perspective or a teaching type perspective, your team, your core team will resonate with you for the work that you're guided to do. And if you are a teacher in learning, if you like, again, your team will support you to guide you along the path to become the teacher or the spiritual leader or the healer or therapist, again, depending on what your disciplines are and what your interests are. So they're always here to support us to develop ourselves and develop our skills to be of service. That's sort of this field that I sort of seem to work in. Most people that I work with seem to be working in service to others. I'm doing this kind of work. Then there's obviously other tarot and other stuff, which is a completely different kettle of fish. But in this work, when you're doing a lot of coaching type work, really, it is, I'm working with those who are of service and their team, whatever it is been. Sometimes it'll be about the person's own personal healing journey, but ultimately the team that they work with is for their growth, for them to become a guide to others. Did I actually answer that? Sorry,
You
I think
did.
that,
No, you did. You took it in a different direction too.
sorry.
No, not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. It was making me reflect on my own journey and that of students, in that what I'm about to say, it sounds very like it works in like these 3 steps, and it isn't. It's absolutely all overlapping. But what was occurring to me as you're talking about is, as you were talking, is initially I think our guides are very much helping us to heal and us to kind of like get onto the path we need to be getting onto. And then, as you're saying, like then it starts to be about kind of like really moving us into the right role, you know, like what do I need to be a guide, a teacher of others? And that for me is where kind of like my helpers needed to give me like a big push, because I was so resistant. So that was it. Kind of like, some people it's not such a big phase. For me that was a really important phase of ways that my own guides were really informing the choices I needed to make. And then that final stage is directly helping you in the work you do. Like, for example, if I'm doing a shamanic healing, my guides are basically doing the work. I'm kind of like there holding the space, being the kind of hollow bone for it to happen, but I'm not really doing very much at all. They are. And so they are very directly kind of helping in that instance. But I was, as you were talking, I was like, oh, that's really interesting the way. And of course these things circle back, you know, my healing work isn't done, hence the experience I shared with you earlier. But I think there is a kind of flavor to those phases in the different ways that our guides will help us. Is that what you've noticed too?
I think actually summing it up like that, I think you're right, and it actually brings me to the thought, it's like a 3-phase process. There may be other phases more subtle in between, but if you think of it in the terms of maiden, mother, and crone, it is that 3-phase process. As we start at the beginning with curiosity, excitement, what is out in the world for us. We then become the nurturer in the mother phase of learning about ourselves and wondering, you know, how do we deepen this? What's our role? Where's it going to lead us to in the mother phase? Of course, in the crone phase, we are then able to be the wisdom keepers to guide others and hold space for others. It just made me think of that maiden, mother, crone energy of those 3 phases of life. Our spiritual journey probably isn't dissimilar, to be honest, with looking back on it, with what you've just said.
Yes, no apologies needed at all. I love that. We work a lot with archetypes and we see them, of course, we see them show up everywhere. So I actually, I love that expression of it. So we are now up on time. Where can listeners find out more about you and your wonderful work? And I know you've got a challenge coming up as well.
I have. So you've got my book. There's my book, which is available on Amazon and other good bookstores, which is How to Live with Dragons. And that will guide people. That will guide people through connecting and working with their dragons and the journey they took me on. So it's a condensed into a book, my 20 years of understanding and working with a dragon. Ultimately, all the usual social media, YouTube, Caroline Dragon Lady, I think it is, Facebook, the original Dragon Lady, Instagram, the original Dragon Lady, and my YouTube is Caroline Dragon. Facebook, oh goodness, website is Caroline Dragon Lady, I think.
Wonderful.
So just if you put in Caroline Dragon Lady, you'll find me.
Wonderful. Do you want to say a little bit about the challenge you've got coming up?
Oh yeah, don't forget the challenge. So Spirit have been nudging me to actually create a challenge, and going back to our conversation about devotion. And this is a 30-day spiritual challenge that's coming up a little bit later in the year. And I take you through a series of meditations, daily meditations, for you to deepen your connection to self, to spirit, but also your spiritual practice. And it's a 30 days consecutive challenge. You can start it and end it wherever you want to. Once it's live, which will be a little bit later in the year, you can pick it up and put it down as you need to. But the idea is it's 30 days of daily spiritual practice to get you into the habit of forming that time and that connection to spirit for you to fly on your journey in whichever direction it takes you, to give you that foundation, to give you wings.
Ah, love it. Thank you so much, Caroline. This has been an absolute delight. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Some challenging questions that made me really think about it. And I know I like conversations like this. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, yes, really my pleasure. Thank you so much.